Let's start with the questions. Mr. Cardoni, could you briefly comment on where we are today in terms of the governance of Antarctica and what you see as the main challenges for the near future? Please.
Okay, thank you, Isa. I will try to be very brief. In terms of governance, we can consider the Antarctic regime, also as the Antarctic System or ATS, as a very, very resilient and highly successful regime. It has adapted to the change of the international setting, the incorporation of new actors, including non-state organizations. It has managed to include issues not covered on the original agreement and even avoid the escalation of the Malvinas War into the region. So basically, we have a system that has demilitarized the continent, regulate human presence, reduce its impact over the environment, and favor the international cooperation in Antarctic research. However, I would say that there are two challenges that could pose some risks to the Antarctic regime in the short term. One is increasing pressure over fishing. I mean, the activity has been more or less successfully regulated by the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, known as CONLAR, but it started to show some signs of stress. We have almost all parties of the Antarctic Treaty favoring the extension of some for special protection, and China and Russia, as we know, rejecting even their concord to that protection. So the other one is climate change. And this is a personal view. Basically, and I can expand more on this on the Q&A. As global warming affects Antarctica, and it is produced elsewhere. I mean, it's not produced in Antarctica, but affects Antarctica. So it could call into question the efficacy of the Antarctic system taking care of Antarctica on behalf of humankind. Of course, the ATS could not be blamed for that, but my point is that the efficacy of the regime could start to be called into question. So I think I will keep on that. Thank you.
Professor Matos, do you agree with what Cardoni said? What are your thoughts on the present and the future of the regime?
Thank you, Isabel. First, I'd like to, of course, good morning, good afternoon all. I'd like to thank you, King's College London and University of São Paulo for the invitation to be here today, together with my friends Gerson Simões, Inácio Cardoni, and for first time, Inácio Rojas. And answer your question, Isabel, I agree, of course, with Cardoni, but I like to mention other points. First, it's very important to say that the Antarctica Treaty is one of the most successful treaties that we have today. I think that this is a very important point. Since 1959, there have been no military exercises, no military bases, no nuclear or weapons tests in Antarctica, only scientific exploration, and of course some tourists too. And I think that Rojas understands that. So this is a huge victory, and we should celebrate that. And of those 29, we started 1959 with just 12 countries, and now we have 29 consultative members of the Antarctic Treaty. And I like to remind that of those 29, there are 14 members of the G20 and all 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council are part of those consultative members of the Antarctic Treaty. So the most powerful countries in the world are responsible for Antarctica, and I think that this is good. But talking about challenges, as far as the future is concerned, we may have a problem regarding the terms of the treaty when we talk about mineral exploration in Antarctica. And I'm not saying just oil and gas, but rare earth minerals, for example, and other kind of minerals. While today this issue is under control, we should take on a realistic perspective and admit that we don't have mineral exploration there, not because countries are really concerned about the environment, but due to the high cost of exploration. So I think that this is a very important point. And try to imagine it this way. Every time you listen someone talking about moon or Mars exploration or something financially viable, remember that Antarctica is way closer to home. The global population is growing rapidly. Total, we are almost 8 billion people, and in 2050, we should be almost 10 billion. And we should not forget about that the consumption of energy per capita is growing fast too. So this raises the question, where will this amount of energy come from? So I think that this is a very important point. And another challenge is about the military perspective. This is a huge continent surrounded by three most important oceans of the world, and having a military base and or ballistic missiles there could be a great challenge for many important sea lanes and important countries, especially in the southern hemisphere. To this extent, it's urgent that the scientific community increase their research in Antarctica in order to prove how important the continent is to the global environment. The Antarctic Treaty should remain as it is right now, without any kind of mineral exploration, and which can have a huge impact on the environment of South Atlantic Ocean, and especially in the nearest countries like Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Brazil, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. Last year, for example, Brazil suffered a lot from a huge oil spill that happened in our northeastern coastal waters. So it's very difficult to say how badly that spill has affected our environment and what will be its long-term consequence. So imagine this oil spill happening in Antarctica. So I think that this is a huge challenge for the future of the treaty. Thanks, Isabel.
Professor Simões, you are a vice president of the SCAR, and you have a long-standing career in Antarctic research. How important is science for the governance of Antarctica? How do you think that science would stand in the future of the continent? Please, I would like to ask very brief questions because we have a very short time.
Okay, thank you all for the invitation, Ignacio, and good morning, good evening, or good afternoon to all. And of course, science has been one of the bastions of human presence in Antarctica, both for research and the development of technology to explore the extreme environment, and more important, as the precursor of the Antarctic Treaty. In fact, SCAR, for example, was created as a special committee for conducting research in international cooperation during the International Geophysical Year 1957-58, or in other words, precedes the treaty itself. And since then, SCAR has been the scientific advisory institution for the Antarctic Treaty. Over the decades, the role of science was essential for creation of several environment preservation conventions. And at the end, resulting in the Madrid Protocol of 1991. So today is the quality of science carried out that determines the status of a country in the Antarctic Treaty system, and not the simple presence in the region. The challenge is to preserve Antarctica in the next decades, and to be the great path for the international cooperation to keep it in Antarctica. And I agree totally with Professor Leonardo Matos about the challenge of mineral exploitation that may come in less than 50 years. And we have a new resource that's becoming quite scarce in the world. That's water. And mining the ice of Antarctica is going to be the first thing to challenge us in the decades to come.
Thank you. Closing this issue, I'd like to ask Mr. Rojas, who has much experience and knowledge about the Antarctic tourism, how the industry has dealt with the Antarctic regime, and what are the most relevant difficulties that it could experience in the foreseeable future?
Good morning to all, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel. Good morning to all the panelists. Let's drop immediately into the question. Cruise tourism in Antarctica, it represents probably the most significant economic activity at the moment. Uh, this started maybe back in the 60s, non-completely regulated, but since the signing and entering into effect of the Madrid Protocol, or as it called, the Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty, which is an addition to the Antarctic Treaty, the companies that used to do tourism in Antarctica got together and form an organization known today as IAT, International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators. This association self-manage the tourism activities in Antarctica following the procedures of the Madrid Protocol. So very much the tourist industry, particularly in the area of the peninsula, as cruise tourism is very much managed within the constraints, within the regulations of the Antarctic Treaty. I believe there are very important things in the industry. It works on several levels. On the bigger level, as the cruise industry, there is a strong awareness there is a very specific niche market for exotic wildlife and extraordinary nature locations. In terms of the individual companies, there is a strong urge to preserve this Antarctic environment to provide a renewable resource in regards to the visitations. And the most critical part of the operations in Antarctica is the field personnel. The field personnel guides people like myself, which have come basically in the past from an academic background. We have a very strong environmental conservation values, and we try to bring that over to the people which are visiting with us. So very much within the industry in all levels, from corporate level to field level, there is a very strong commitment, and there is a lot of knowledge in regards to the regulations which surrounds the use and the operations in Antarctica. So I think this is very important to know. Uh, Challenges for Antarctica and the tourism. I think one of the most challenges, one of the biggest challenges is misinformation. Tourism as an economic activity in Antarctica is surrounded by a lot of mystique and misinformation. So anytime news about Antarctica and tourism are brought over in the main media, there is a lot of wrong information. There is not really giving a context about this industry operates. So that thing is a big challenge in regards to this industry in Antarctica. Of course, nowadays, due to the shift of economic activities, there's been a great interest from mainstream tour industry to explore Antarctica. So ships are being built that are specific to this kind of operation, particularly ships that are compliant to the Polar Code and ships that are able to operate below 60 degrees latitude in the south, which is the area, political area of the Antarctic Treaty, in regards to waste management and other environmental concerns, including the use of heavy fuels. So heavy fuels are banned by tourist ships on the use in Antarctica. Only light marine diesel is used. So in the event of a spill, like Professor Simoes mentioned, or I think Professor Leonardo mentioned, it will not create a pool of oil on the area. So the light marine diesel is something that will evaporate over the time. So these are factors which are used by the industry to comply with the regulations for protection of nature in Antarctica. And global climate change, as I was mentioned already, I think is one of the biggest challenges. As within our lifetime, within the time that I've been to Antarctica, I have observed personally how the environment has changed, not only in regards to temperatures, ice cover, ice changes, the unpredictability of the weather. So these are challenges which are not directly related to Antarctica, but are an effect of the world condition in Antarctica. And this is also a very strong point that you use for the education of the people which come as tourists to Antarctica, where we can, with live examples, show how this is affect the environment in terms of the geology, the glaciology, in terms of the wildlife, which is living in the Antarctic Peninsula. Just as a final point, most of the Antarctic tourism is based on the Antarctic Peninsula, a short jump from South America, starting either from Ushuaia, Punta Arenas, or the Falkland Malvinas. So this is the shortest distance. So the main tourist activities by ship depart from these three ports down to the Antarctic Peninsula, which is explored by the expedition travel industry. Thank you.
Now let me jump to Brazil. We've seen recently the country's renewed commitment to its presence in the region. And some pieces of evidence are the new Antarctic Station Comandante Ferraz, which was rebuilt after a fire, and the announcement of the future acquisition of another polar vessel. In this respect, I would like to ask Professor Simões, what are the significance and the impact of those developments for the Antarctic program?
We need to understand that we have two aspects, one logistical and another one is the scientific research establishment. If you look at the logistic one, it was essential that we reach that a point that we have a extremely good research station. And in fact, it's the first time that we have a station totally dedicated to research in Antarctica, because the last one that unfortunately burned in 2012 was something not really appropriate for research at a state of art. So we have now a station that can provide a lot of support for some areas of scientific research, such as biological research, different kind of biology to understand the biodiversity of Antarctica in relation to the other parts of the world, and some areas of atmospheric research. So we have really improved a lot, and now with a new logistic ship that is supposed to be built in the next couple of years, we are going to improve even better our logistics. But on the other hand, we still lack the most important thing. That's a system that maintains the funding of the scientific part on an ongoing basis. Otherwise, from time to time, we will have crises in Antarctica, on average every 4 years. At the moment, I envisage a financing crisis in 2022. Then the government, say Antarctica, and especially the Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, you will have to decide on the future of a research project, and especially the National Institute of Science and Technology of the Cryosphere. We must still consider that it's time to Brazil to create a National Antarctic Research Institute. From my point of view, the most advisable would be a creation of a virtual institute, following the same model of the National Institutes of Science and Technology. In addition, there is a very strong crisis in the teaching and research system in Brazil in general, and that's affecting already the Antarctic training and affecting our professionals. We have, just for example, we have by now, just this year, 33 doctors trained on Antarctica research that are unemployed or with postdoctoral scholarships for just 1 year. So we need to balance it. We need to have a structure for science and for education that's proportionally well financed and gives at least some stability. If not, we are going to have up and downs. Is almost cyclic, the situation of science in the Brazilian Antarctic program, as in fact in all Brazilian science, but especially here that we have a short time to go to Antarctica, and it takes a lot of the researcher and from the labs.
Professor Matos, do you think that those actions have been in some way an answer to the inclusion of Antarctica within the strategic environment of Brazil?
Yes, I do. But it's important to say, Isabel, that the huge fire that happened in our station in February 2012, which completely destroyed the station and killed 2 military personnel, caused a considerable commotion in the government and Congress about our presence in Antarctica. Many of our representatives in Congress just became aware that that we are in Antarctica after that huge tragedy. The new national defense policy was being written at that time, 2012. And I'm pretty sure that what happened there had a great influence on our decision makers in order to add Antarctica to our strategic environment concept. In 2005, our national defense policy did not consider Antarctica as part of this concept. However, in the updated 2012 version, approved by the Congress only in 2013, Antarctica was included. Of course, the new station and the decision to acquire a new polar ship are consequence of the inclusion of Antarctica in our strategic surroundings. And one thing that we should do more in Brazil is exactly what this event is trying to achieve. We need to discuss more about Antarctica. My perception is that most of our society doesn't really understand why we should be there, why Antarctica is important to Brazil. For me, it's unacceptable that an undergraduate student, for example, international relations student, does not know about the Antarctica Treaty and why Antarctica is important for us. During my lectures, I like to mention that, for example, a ship that set sail from our southernmost port, Rio Grande port in Rio Grande do Sul state, would arrive first in Antarctica, then in Fortaleza, a city in our northern eastern coast. Of course, Brazil has a very extensive coast, but this example comes to show how geographically close Antarctica is to Brazil. So I think that we should do more events like this one and to create some kind of Antarctica mentality in our society. We don't have that yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cardoni, what are your opinions on that?
Hi, thank you, Sam. Well, my view is that Brazil has consolidated its profile in Antarctica. I don't see any significant change in the way in which Brazil approaches the continent, but it is an interesting development in what regard on modernizing its infrastructure and providing more safety and reducing the environmental impacts of its operation. In brief, it doesn't seem to result in the acquisition of substantial new capabilities, even when resulting in a significant improvement of the existing ones, which is probably a lesson that Brazil learned from the accident of 2012, as Professor Matos said. And in a way, it seems a very smart choice. I mean, instead of expanding its action to new theaters of operation, Brazil ensures that its current operation can take place in the best possible conditions. Of course, that responds in a way to the place that Antarctica has for Brazil. But, well, I will not enter to that point. And now, if somebody wants to ask, then we do that in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rojas, would you say that such actions could present some opportunity for Brazil in terms of Antarctic tourism?
I think I can split that question in two. A direct influence in Brazilians as tourists? I don't believe so. Brazil as a source of tourism for Antarctica, I don't think it is a market that has developed. Brazilians are still exploring what I will call the mainstream tourist industry. with companies coming to the coast of Brazil and bringing the tourists into the large ships. I see a question on the Q&A here. Maybe I just touch a little bit on this particular question. The tourism industry in Brazil is very much associated with mega ships, large ships, 2,000 passengers that go out of the coast 3 days, where the main attraction is the ship on itself. For Antarctica, the main attraction is the destination, and most of the cruises which go to Antarctica and provide opportunities to go ashore, they are ships that range anything between 100 to 500 people, with the vast majority between 200 and 100. So that's the main industry. So this is a very small market, it's very dedicated, and the main product which is put there is education. So the guests are not attending shows, playing in the casinos, eating in restaurants. Our main objective is the education of the guest. Now, sorry to say this a little bit bluntly, but myself, when I would go on vacation, I would not go to be educated. I would go to enjoy, whatever, winter sports. Let's take that misconception that Brazilians just want to beach. Brazilians go to areas where they can explore exotic locations, but it's a more, let's call it fun activity rather than an educational activity. Just for an idea, we have an extensive lecture program in every single ship that goes to Antarctica, departing from South America to the Antarctic Peninsula and other locations that are gateway ports. So that's one. Brazil as a gateway for foreigners to do a jump, to do a shorter trip, or do the flight exchange to go down to gateway ports to go to Antarctica. That could be a potential opportunity. But as a Brazilian market on itself, I think Brazil has not reached that desire for nature education, nature exploration, which is reached in other nationalities, particularly in Europe, United States, which come to Antarctica. A side comment on that, China has become a great source of tourists in the near, just in the near past. But I think there is a great involvement of China in regards to promoting Antarctica as part of a potential area for economic development. So I think that also is behind the push of the Chinese government to promote Antarctica and create this kind of tourism to be coming down to Antarctica. I don't know if Brazil might be fitting into that kind of setup, but in regards to me or you or anyone in Brazil choosing Antarctica to go as a touristic destination, I don't think it is something that will capture the imagination of the Brazilian population as a tourist destination.
Thank you. Let's change the subject to the relationship between Antarctica and the South Atlantic. Professor Matos, you are a specialist in geopolitics, so you probably had a particular view on the links between Antarctica and the South Atlantic. Do you think that Antarctica is important for the South Atlantic region from a geopolitical perspective?
Yes, of course. It's very important for us to remember, Isabel, that three countries, Argentina, Chile, and United Kingdom, claimed parts of the Antarctica territory a long time ago, and none of them have given up their claims yet, which is a problem because those claimed territories partly overlap Argentina, Chile, and the United Kingdom. So this is a huge geopolitical challenge, I think, in which some specialists like to say that the UK is in the Falklands, Malvinas Islands, mostly because of their Antarctica claim, rather than due to the islands themselves. It's interesting to note that Canadian Senator Pascal Poirier in 1907 used this sector theory to justify which part of the Arctic Ocean belongs to Canada. And likewise, Brazilian professor Terezinha de Castro, in her famous 1956 article, where she claimed part of the Antarctic territory for Brazil. So Maybe the same sector theory could help to justify the United Kingdom's claims in a possible future dispute about territories in Antarctica. I know that my friend Inácio doesn't like it when I say this, but as a geopolitical professor, I believe that these territorial claims don't help the main idea of keeping an Antarctica continent just for scientific research without the presence of any kind of economic exploration in the continent. Of course, I respect all rights and claims that sovereign countries made in the past, but every time one of my students brings up questions about any of those 7 claims made by Argentina, Australia, Chile, France, New Zealand, Norway, and UK, it makes me wonder. If we agree that the best scenario for the planet is to keep Antarctica preserved, how can we even consider splitting the continent in many sovereign territories? The moment you do so, you open the possibility for states to do as they wish on those territories. I know that no one likes to give up their rights, but let's try to at least open the discussion in the scientific community and at the annual meeting of the state parties of the Antarctica Treaty. In other words, what are the environmental and geopolitical consequences of this country's Antarctica territorial claims? So that's my main concern about geopolitics when we talk about Antarctica and South Atlantic Ocean. Thanks, Isabel.
And Professor Simões, taking advantage of your scientific knowledge of the region, what could you tell us about the physical and environmental links between the Antarctic region, the South Atlantic, and Brazil?
Well, we need to understand that Antarctica is as important as the tropics in the global environment system. It's interconnected with processes that occur at lower latitudes, especially with the South American atmosphere and the surrounding oceans. It's the main energy sink in the Earth's atmosphere. Its ocean has an essential role in the world food web. In short, due to the geographical proximity and peculiarities of the process involving the physical and biotic environment, Antarctica directly affects South America. In relation to the South American subtropics and tropics, now we know that the high latitudes are linked by the genesis and dynamics of the cold air masses generated in the Southern Ocean, which at a synoptic scale advance towards the subtropics of South America, producing low temperature events and frosts, for example, in the Brazilian southern states. And these cold fronts can sometimes even reach southern Amazonia. Evidently, the climate system has this connection in both directions. That is, tropical process also affect the climate of the polar region. On this point, research shows that changes in the sea surface temperature in the tropical Atlantic Ocean are linked to the rapid winter warming observed in the western coast of the Antarctic Peninsula. So it's quite clear that the system, as expected, is coupled, and the things that happen there affects our day-to-day business.
Thank you. Mr. Rojas, how important is the South Atlantic for Antarctic tourism? I mean, in terms of complementary destinations, navigation, logistics, and infrastructure.
The importance for tourism that is associated to Antarctica has diminished quite a lot on the last few years. Unhappily, operational and logistics and costs regulations for the use of Brazilian ports have diverted a lot of the smaller vessels, once again, making differentiation in between the mainstream cruise industry with the large vessels and the vessels that explore Antarctica, which are mainly small vessels with a very limited amount of people. So if you think in terms of economy, the costs are split between a much smaller number of people, which make these cruises quite expensive, much more than any of the mainstream cruises you find in the coast of Brazil. So many of the vessels, many of the ships which use Antarctica as an end destination generally will avoid the Brazilian coast. So we have cruises which are either called the Lost Islands of the Atlantic, where smaller vessels will go for bird watching expeditions to see pelagic birds, birds that are only found in open sea, or to find those smaller islands along between Africa and South America as a stop points, as a curiosity. I don't know, anyone might have heard of the Century Club, which travelers collect countries, and in theory, you have at least 100 countries to belong on those clubs. So there is a market for people that want to visit that kind of destination. However, again, the number of people which are taking this kind of cruises, it was a figure that was mentioned yesterday on the panel, 50,000 people that go to Antarctica throughout the season. There is not really a market which is expressive in regards to using those vessels. So generally, most of the vessels will either do just a transit between Antarctica, either by the Atlantic or the Pacific, straight up to the Arctic. So we call ourselves bipolar because we are either in the Arctic or the Antarctic. So ships will go up to the Arctic and start the Arctic season for tourism, or then they will come down to Antarctica. Some vessels will continue along the coast of Brazil. We'll do what we call the traditional port tourism with buses, visits to town, free time ashore, so main port industry. And very few are exploring the Amazon. And the Amazon as an environment where I started when I got involved in the expedition cruise industry, doing trips in the Amazon and guiding in the Amazon, has gone through a very, very strong decrease on the numbers. 1, 2 expedition ships might go up to the Amazon, particularly due to logistic reasons, costs of operations, while the mainstream large vessels will only transit the Amazon and stop in a couple of ports, Belém, uh, Santarém, or Manaus, without really doing what we call the educational element of the exploration. So they would just be doing the traditional port. So in terms of the South Atlantic, for this very specific niche of the industry, the expedition industry, it doesn't really represent much in terms of committing to do something around this region besides just using it as a transit area between the two polar regions, which are the main season for this type of industry.
Thank you. Um, uh, to close our panel, I would like to ask our guests, which are the main challenges for Brazil Antarctic policy in the near and intermediate future? You can choose any aspect of Brazil's presence or actions. Please choose one. I would like to ask to you guys to be very brief because we have some questions from the audience. Um, we can start with Mr. Rojas.
Um, I would say that for Brazil, one of the most important things in relation to Antarctica is the education in regards to what Antarctica represents, not only in terms of geopolitics and national interest, but in regards to what is the global role of Antarctica in terms of the climate. Um, the the lack of knowledge, and I think Professor Leonardo made a great point, of the Antarctic Treaty. And I have visited, I was born in Chile. I, I lived in Argentina for a while, I mean, just working in Argentina for many years, and also being to the Falkland Malvinas. It's very interesting to me that in the educational system, and on the promotions that are made about about Antarctica, and as I mentioned, Professor Jefferson, in regards to the geopolitics, in regards to the claims, in their educational system, in their information that goes to the population, generally the Antarctic Treaty membership and what it entails, it is not mentioned. We talk about the claims to the Antarctic Peninsula by Chile, by Argentina, by the UK, but they never speak about that we are part of an Antarctic treaty which lifts these claims of territories for further discussion. And meanwhile, this area is used for peaceful purposes and mainly dedicated to research. Thanks.
Mr. Cardoni, would you mind telling your thoughts about it?
Thank you, Isa. That's a really hard one. I agree with Professor Simons, what he said before. I think the main challenge ahead is giving a solid financial ground for scientific research, especially in the current political context of Antarctic science here in Brazil. But I think that the Antarctic program has a problem of its own, and it has to do, at least to some extent, to the way in which it has been structured within the Brazilian policy. I mean, the program should start to be seen as really strategic for the country, not only in paper, not only for the Navy, not limited to ensure Brazil's participation in the ATS, what sometimes still seems to be the main point, the main objective of the PRONTAR, but in a wider sense. I mean, PRONTAR has long overcome that phase, and it has become a really advanced and prolific scientific program that has pushed scientific development and technological advancement in ways that are mostly unnoticed by the public. So I think that Brazil needs to find a way to ensure long-term financing to institutions specialized in Antarctic research and to researchers. And this is more the case with Antarctic humanity and social sciences, which is probably the most underscored field in Antarctic science here in Brazil, even when it's a growing field elsewhere internationally. I mean, there is only one permanent group in Brazil working with anthropology, at least to my knowledge, and there is almost no room for financing projects or even to understand the importance of issues related with humanities, something that myself have experienced many times here. So I think there's much room for improvement there, and I think I will keep on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Matos, what do you think are the main challenges or the main?
I try to be quick. In the near future, Isabel, I should say that definitely, we must guarantee the funds, like my friend Jefferson mentioned, the funds for our scientific project there in Antarctica. It's very important for us to understand that our presence in and leading role in Antarctica is 100% related to what we produce in terms of science. So this is the big challenge. But I like to add, in the intermediate future, we need to improve our physical presence there by building another station, like other countries have done. For example, China is already building their 50th station, and South Korea already has 2 stations. Just to mention 2 countries that have become consultative members of the Antarctica Treaty after Brazil. Another one would be India, that became a consultative member in 1983 together with Brazil, and already has 2 permanent stations there in Antarctica. My question is, why Brazil, one of the richest countries in the world and one of the closest countries to Antarctica, should only have 1 station? And in conclusion, one more point, please, Isabel, is we can talk about Antarctica, and I'm very happy that the whole has mentioned a little bit that we can't talk about Antarctica without also questioning what's going on up there in the Arctic, where there is no treaty like we have in Antarctica. And there is mineral exploration there in the Arctic. There are military exercises, Russia, NATO, fishing, exploration. And it is important to point out that what is going on right now in the Arctic, like those military exercises and etc., could happen in Antarctica in the future. That's why I'm convinced that Brazil should have a role there in the Arctic too. If we defend more protection in the Arctic region, we indirectly will be helping to keep Antarctica safe to any kind of exploration in the future. Those my takes now. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Simões, you probably have a very strong view of what is the main challenge for Brazil, haven't you?
Oh, for sure. Of course, I really believe that we must have a strong scientific program, stronger than we have now. And it's important not only for the the results of scientific program. I think mainly for the development of our technology and for the training of people that is going to work over there, and to keep some kind of leadership in the Antarctic Treaty System, mainly between the developing countries. And that is include, of course, cooperation with our countries, not only from South America, but from the BRICS as usual. And towards that, we need to really think beyond the science itself. We need to think about an integrated science, social science, not only research program, but also social communication, outreach, and education in the Brazilian society. And of course, the future is really of the Antarctic system, and the Brazilian involvement with the Antarctica is really attached to the question of environment changes and the way that we are taking the resources elsewhere in the country, in the world. And that comes to the main question: what's the next area of a frontier? This question is, where's the next frontier area for exploitation of resources? I do believe, as Commandant Leonardo said, is the Arctic. Of course, the Africa as well, but the Arctic is going to go before Antarctica as a new frontier. And that are the challenges for the next 2-3 decades.
Thank you. Now I will jump to the questions. I think that the first one, Professor Rojas already mentioned. The second question is from Camila, who would answer her question. We have a lot of questions, so we have to choose someone to answer. I think that Dr. Matos would answer this one. That is, global governance is changing with new actors, interests, and issues, making the global scenario more complex. Could the panel indicate, I would ask only Mr. Matos because of the time. Could the Professor Matos indicate the emerging issues for international governance in the region and the actors to look at?
Thank you, Camila, for your question. I think that, as I said, what we are seeing there in Antarctica is a slow process of to change from a scientific perspective to a geopolitical perspective. So, as I mentioned, China is building her 50th station there. Other countries like Australia already has 3 permanent stations in Antarctica. India, 2 permanent stations in Antarctica. So this, if we think about those new stations and that energy problem that I mentioned on that first one of the questions, and I agree 100% with Professor Jefferson. Antarctica will be the next challenge, the next area of interest, but I think that Antarctica comes right after that. So that is the challenge. So how to protect Antarctica, how to keep the Antarctica Treaty as it is right now. That is a very, very huge challenge for everyone. So that's why I think that the international community, especially the scientists, it's very important to teach, to show to the entire society, the global society, why Antarctica should keep as it is right now. So just for science and not for mineral exploitation and other things. This will be definitely a big challenge when we talk about the governance in Antarctica. Thank you, Camila. Thank you, Isabel, for the question.
There is a question from G. Leslie. I would send this question to Mr. Cardone. Is there a chance that present Antarctic Treaty will not be renewed? So certain can be free to grab resources. What's mechanism to renew treaty? How many need to vote for continuation, etc.?
Thank you, Lisa. I think I'm gonna grab that one and the next ones. First of all, just to be clear, the Antarctic Treaty doesn't need to be renewed. So it has no expiration date, nor the treaty, nor the Madrid Protocol. So that's a common misunderstanding. There is no need to renew the treaty. So that's the answer, the correct answer. The threat posed by fishing is limited. I mean, we have a system in place. Of course, there are violations to that, but they are not that great. But we still need much improvement on that sense. Monitoring of fishing by drones, that's not going to happen in Antarctica. It's really dangerous for the Antarctic environment. Drone operations very delicate, so it's starting to think about how to regulate it. But we have different means for monitoring. I recommend you to visit the CONLAR site, which is the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. But that's more or less the answer. I'm gonna take the next ones as well as they are for politics. So should not UK, Argentina, Chile, in fact, all state withdraw their claims? No, they should not. I mean, there is nothing in the treaty that actually the treaty, what the political equilibrium that reach, it's about nobody altering the status quo. I mean, they didn't need to withdraw their claims, and that's something that actually, in my view, as Matt says, it maintains the equilibrium and not the opposite. So I'm not sure it's going to play better to think of that. So I think that you need to have a better understanding, and we are in national state, territorial national state systems. So I mean, maybe in another international setting that could be possible, but I don't think it could be possible in this setting as well. So has President Bolsonaro affected or changed Brazil government's attitude to Antarctica? I don't think Bolsonaro has any thoughts about Antarctica. So that's, I don't know if somebody else in the panel have any thoughts on that, but I don't think.
I would leave this last one to Mr. Simões, Dr. Simões, about Bolsonaro's position, and after this we can we don't have many time for the other questions. So please, Dr. Simões.
What's the question?
About Bolsonaro's government position.
Well, the president himself has never talked about Antarctica, and I think that doesn't matter. And the vice president, General Mourão, was quite strong about the interest of Brazil in Antarctica and keeping and evaluating the program. He was there in the inauguration, and it has the same understanding of the Minister of External Relations that the treaty is the way that we manage the Antarctic region. So no changes.
Okay, thank you. So unfortunately, our time is up. I would like to thank our guests and the audience. I think we had a very diverse and a fruitful exchange, although the time was very short. I'm sorry. Please, if you have enjoyed this and the other panels, please don't leave the room. Stay with us because I guess Maisa will say something. So stick with us, and thank you again for being with us in this room. Thank you, the guests.